Welcome to ADHD Realities. I'm your host, Leanne Borneman, sexologist and certified sex therapist.
Are you feeling a bit challenged by the desire for sex? You're definitely not alone if this is the case. Many of my clients who have ADHD, especially the women I see, are facing similar struggles, and I would be completely lying if I didn't say I also struggle with this. It can be so frustrating, however, that there is a ton of research on low desire and a whole lot on ADHD, but not much that combines the two together. And as a therapist who specializes in ADHD and someone who has ADHD, I've had to get creative and adapt my approach to better fit our unique experiences. And so when we're talking about low desire alone, outside of the context of ADHD, is going to often stem from stress. And for us who have ADHD, we're going to have then our own ADHD stressors on top of the quote typical stressors. And one thing we often seek as ADHDers is this concept of immediate gratification. If the conditions for intimacy aren't supportive of our enjoyment, it can feel overwhelming. It can feel mundane, almost like it becomes a chore without any instant reward whatsoever. And this can become a stressor in itself, which can make us then want to avoid the sex altogether. Think of sex as this task that requires planning, focus, and energy. If you're already drained or you feel pressured by any possible unrealistic expectations, your mind might actually shut down instead of being this engaging interest, which then becomes far from ideal. Just like any other activity, sex needs to be set up for our success. If you start viewing sex as this obligation, that's another hurdle. Anything that feels like a duty is going to be less likely to then spark our interest. So, another big important thing to be mindful of is that our sensory experiences can also play a big role in these challenges. When we're talking about our senses like smell, taste, sound, sight, and touch, all of this can hugely impact then our desire, that interest piece. And sometimes even certain lubrications or even the sounds in the background can become very overwhelming and distracting. So when it comes to the work I do, many of my clients find that insecurities about their body can be intensified through the sensory experiences that they're having, making them feel very disconnected from what's actually happening. And it's essential to remember that insecurities can be a slippery slope for those of us with ADHD because we can possibly then become hyperfixated on our thoughts, which then makes it even harder for us to break free from them. Smells. Even smells can be a concern. If you have preferences around hygiene or a dislike for certain scents, like maybe let's say a partner's cologne or perfume, these can detract one from intimacy. Temperature. It's just another factor. If it's too cold, too hot, the discomfort can make it hard to focus on anything else because now you're zoned in on the temperature aspect of it. It might be helpful to identify what sensory experiences you find enjoyable or unsettling, and then collaborate with your partner to create a comfortable environment for the intimacy you're trying to create. Talking about insecurities doesn't mean they have to fully be resolved to engage. Consider creative ways to present yourself that feel right for you while also exploring these feelings together. So, the fear that comes with conflict can be such a hinder to our ability to connect. And sometimes we might actually avoid disagreements simply because we're struggling with them. And then that just causes more distance, right? We may fear losing our train of thought or this feeling of anxiety because of the possibility it could lead to emotion dysregulation. Plus, for some of us with ADHD, the tendency of people pleasing. Oh, God, people pleasing, which does not happen in all individuals with ADHD. Please understand that. This can just add another layer of complication, making it harder then to navigate the difficult talks that you're trying to engage in. So, processing our thoughts clearly during conflict is going to be super crucial, but it can be a challenge because traditional forms of communication offer favor neurotypical norms, which might not work for us. So sometimes sending a text, an email, or handwritten notes can alleviate the stress that's going to be tied to the conflict and also the lack of support for us neurodivergent folk. And this approach might just be the key to then setting up those important conversations in a way that feels authentic to you and your partner. So a great example, I once worked with a couple where both of the partners were teachers. And I absolutely loved it because it hit that nerd part of who I am. They would actually create PowerPoint dates. Yes, PowerPoint dates. Ah, my nerd brain, love it. And what they would actually do is they would share their concerns in a structured manner that worked for them. And that's the key. It worked for them. Even if it seemed a bit quirky to others or weird, right? It's going to be so vital when we're talking about any topic surrounding ADHD and our relationships and our intimacy. We have to embrace what works for us. That is going to be vital. Vital in establishing healthy back and forth conversations and interactions with our partners. When it comes to, let's say, household chores and parenting, energy is also going to play a role in this low desire, specifically when we're trying to shift focus in an ADHD lens. If chores aren't balanced according to each person's needs, it can lead to frustration and the resentment. And sometimes we might unintentionally view our partner as a child. And if we feel we're constantly managing those responsibilities, it makes sense why we then might think of our partner as a child. And let me tell you something. You're going to have a hard time then feeling attracted to somebody who you have identified or view as a child, right? So it really helps to sit down and openly discuss the household demands and how can you share chores. It's important to remember that ADHD affects individuals differently. Some may have no issue with chores, while others might struggle with this immensely. So a good example, I find doing dishes and laundry particularly challenging due to my sensory preferences and physical discomfort, which kind of just ties into the sensory preference. But I use communication, and I've advised my husband of this, and we've identified strengths and our weaknesses, and we kind of have made like the agreement to like swap what works better for us, right? Like what works for the unit. And thankfully, we've figured out a way that works for us. Now, understanding these dynamics is going to be a key to ensuring our relationships are thriving, helping us prevent those feelings of accumulating resentment that can come from an uneven division of labor. And together, we can create an environment when you do this in your relationships that supports our needs and encourages connections. Say it enough. We live in a neurotypical world with neurotypical expectations that are literally everywhere on our relationships and the intimacy that we're having. And so if we're going into these dynamics, specifically sex, and they're not set up for our success, and they are driven by neurotypical expectations, and let's say you're also heterosexual, now you got a layer of heterosexual expectations on top of the neurotypical expectations. And let's say you're a woman that's experiencing the low desire. Now you have an expectation of what it means to be a woman and showing up in that dynamic, right? All of those things come with an expectation attached to it. But really zoning into this concept of neurotypical expectations that are placed within these types of dynamics that we're navigating, when it comes to our intimacy, we have to make sure that it is set up for our success. And so understanding how your ADHD is showing up, what are those ADHD stressors that you're having, and then unpacking what are your needs, what are your accommodations, That's the ticket to setting our environments up for success. That's our ticket to helping set our sex up for success. So I've outlined to you that when it comes to our ADHD, the empirical data currently does not support this understanding or exploration surrounding our experiences with low desire. What I've done is I have created what we do know of both categories, and I've created this important piece of understanding what are those ADHD stressors that are most popular that could be affecting why you're experiencing low desire and not wanting to show up in the bedroom. Working with a professional is always going to help navigate these barriers, these stressors, and figuring out ways to really help you set your intimacy, your relationship all up for success.